Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Stand Up Speakeasy. These always catch me off guard. I should be like doing something silly, but I don't. But the Stand Up Speakeasy is like me interviewing comics from the Central Time Zone, and because I wanted to go on tour, but I couldn't because of COVID. So wah. But I usually spend like 10 to 20 minutes with them, but with these interviews, I get to spend a lot more time with them and digging their brains as comics and stuff, and so it's a lot of fun. So, with that being said, my guest on this episode is Brandon Kirkman from Chicago. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing good, just taking it easy, a nice lazy Sunday right now. So, revealing the date we recorded this on, which is fun. So,
Indeed, most definitely. It'll come out in January, but I plan on watching the Broncos game later today, so it should
yeah,
be fun.
yeah. Let's see if we're even like still around as a nation by January, depending on how it goes from here.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm
Yeah,
like, good gravy. Can't wait for. Well, the election is in 2 days, so but this is like gonna be after the election, so we'll see what happens in January. So,
yeah. It's going to be a lot of drinking between now and then, no matter what. So,
indeed,
and if you don't drink, I hope you have a very good vice to replace it then.
indeed, I think I'm gonna go for some eggnog.
Yeah, eggnog. Hey, you know what? I'm a big eggnog stan. I'm just gonna go on record right now, especially with it being January when this is gonna release. It's still probably on the market shelves. I don't know why people shit on it so much, but like I get it's kind of got that like gross viscosity to it, but it's a good drink. You can do a lot of fun things with it.
Most definitely, indeed. And so I wanted to kick this off with Brandon's information. Scrolling on the bottom, his Instagram and Twitter, and his website's below too, which is kirkmanbrandon.weebly.com. Visit his website for some cool artwork. And if you want to donate to his account, his PayPal account is scrolling on the bottom too. And donate to ACLU.org and ChicagoBond.org. That's his Brandon's organizations of choice to donate to as well. So that'd be
Yeah,
pretty awesome. So
I
what
don't
did
think the situation is going to change in America by January either. So, that's a whole political thing we get into. But let's hope the prison industrial complex is at least being chipped away by the time this comes out.
most def and what did you choose those two organizations to donate to?
ACLU is just a general good kind of watchdog for like morality and politics right now in our nation. It's between being a more leftist and liberal organization. I'm very leftist, but we don't need to get into that. But it's generally a good one that keeps a good, I'd say, lawyered up kind of personnel and like kind of taking action in places where they need, especially with the whole Black Lives Matter protests this last year, and then a lot of the whole shenanigans during Trump's administration for the last 4 years. They're a solid organization that you can at least trust your money's going towards something good if you're donating to them.
Indeed, most definitely. And Brandon, you're a Chicago-based comedian and an illustrator. What got you into those two things?
Well, the illustration and art's a lot easier to talk about. Comedy kind of happened more of a happenstance, but since I was a kid, I've been drawing since I can remember. It actually started with my family's pretty religious, so I grew up in the church, and like any child, was bored out of their fucking mind during the whole time. And the only thing my parents would really let me do is like draw. So I just started drawing a lot. I'd either have sketchbooks or I'd take like we used to have little donation envelopes that you could put money in for like tithing, which they do in the church. I would take it as a kid and I'd like rip it in half so I could draw on the backside where there's no print. So like I had a huge collection of those as a kid where I just like draw comics and robots. And it's just something I've had a passion for a very long time now. So I just kept drawing, and then eventually I went to college for fine arts, majoring in illustration, and decided to make it a career. And it kind of worked and it kind of didn't. It's been an interesting journey, I'll say, but like I'm still making money and getting a lot of commission work for art, so I feel good about that decision. But it's never easy to be an artist, I feel like, if you want to make a living or do anything with it. So it's a fun challenge as you go.
Indeed, most definitely. And so your artwork's been on can be found on your website, which we mentioned earlier, which is kirkmanbrandon.weebly.com, which is some pretty cool artwork. So be sure to check that out. And you've also done work for NPR and the Laugh Factory and the IO. What are some of the works that you did for NPR, the Laugh Factory, and IO?
So the NPR one's a fun one. I did a lot of illustration and poster work for Timothy Barnes or Tim Barnes. He's actually a writer and all that right now. A very good Chicago comic who moved to New York and then LA. But he had a podcast called It's All True that got onto WBZ, and he really liked my art, so he approached me to do a bunch of work for WBZ and NPR when they were promoting it. So that's like a really cool like happenstance that happened, as well as like getting cool work just because a comedian's like, hey, I like your stuff. I mean, it'd be crazy for me to like say no to that. And then I'd say the Laugh Factory and IO ones are just as simple as I had friends that were running shows there at the time. So they're like, hey, you're an artist, do a poster for me. And I'm like, hey, give me money. And I was like, okay, cool, done. So it's a pretty easy point A to point B for how I got those jobs. But, it's nice to be thought of as an artist, not just a comedian, when people are like looking for work too.
Indeed, most definitely. My buddy Charlie McMullen, we grew up together doing stand up in Colorado, and he moved to Memphis and then later to LA, and I moved to Florida myself, and he's my go-to guy when I want something drawn up. And so I got to always support, their side hustles too, and I'm glad you're
Yeah.
doing that for your scene.
I think a lot of comedians who do art kind of get in that role, and I don't think it's a bad thing either, because like Tim Barnes has been pretty successful, and he's always been a fan of my art. So like I'll get ideas or projects from every once in a while, and like as he gets bigger and bigger gigs, I'm like, cool, more eyes on my stuff too. So I mean, not so much I'll scratch your back, I'll scratch yours, but it's just a good camaraderie that you have with like comedian friends that you've built a relationship with. So.
Most definitely, indeed. And so, as a comedian, you've toured a good portion of the country and done shows in Canada and Tokyo. And what are some of your favorite road stories from the states and the countries that you visited?
I mean, the Tokyo one's the easiest because that's just such a completely different experience in every way and form. It's, I think, definitely the highlight of my career. But in 2016, I went on a vacation to Japan and Tokyo with my family. It's something that my mom had planned for years. And she's like, one day, she's like, hey, for Christmas, I'm getting you and your brother tickets to go to Tokyo for 2 weeks with me and your cousin. And I at least had been established enough as a comedian to reach out to a few people. And I'm like, I probably won't get anything. And then I ended up getting like 3 shows lined up in Tokyo. I'm like, oh shit, I guess I'm doing this now. They were all expat shows, which is, like shows for English speakers that are living in Tokyo at the time. So I didn't have to like do it in Japanese, because it's the question I get when I mention is like, oh, do you speak Japanese? And I'm like, fuck no, dude. I'm so stupid. I'm not good at learning other languages, which I wish I was. But it had always been a dream to go there. And then I got to do 2 shows in the Shibuya of Tokyo. And then I did one out in Kamasawa, which is kind of like this almost weird suburb offshoot from Tokyo. And that one is like this beach bar that's right next to this beach where they have all black sand. It was just a really cool experience. All of the shows were really entertaining and great. It was also funny because at the time it was right before the 2016 elections. So every like person there, like whether if they were like from England or Australia or Japanese themselves, were just asking me so many questions about Trump and like, oh, do you think he's going to win? Or is it true that he's doing all these crazy things? And I was like, yes, it's true about the crazy things. And of course he's not going to win, because I was like everyone in 2016 were like, there's no way. Man, what a grim reminder these last 4 years. Once again, not to get too much into politics, but boy, howdy. Yeah.
Indeed. How about some Canada stories?
That one's less exciting. I basically went on vacation in Toronto with my partner / wife, Barb. We were going up there like in 2017. I just lined up a few shows at a few different venues in Toronto. They were all pretty cool and fun. I did an open mic and a showcase at this weird bar I got to look up the name of again, but they're really great audiences. And like, not to toot my own horn, but it's that thing where I think Chicago comics have like a really big reputation of like being really honed on the craft, since we don't really have industry here. A lot of people who end up in Chicago like just want to kind of work on the craft instead of like getting connections. It seems like I'd kind of count myself in that. So like I feel like I had this pressure when talking to people about it to do really good, and I think for both of the performances I had like a really stellar performance, which was nice. So keeping up that like Chicago status, which I think is important to me. I feel like I'm really proud of the Chicago scene, and I always kind of want to like make sure that when I go do a live show somewhere else outside of the state, I'm like, okay, I gotta keep that status that we have going, that like we're really dedicated to the craft.
Most definitely, indeed. And what are some of your favorite states that you toured?
I would say Louisville comes to mind first. The first tour I did kind of stopped there, and then every tour we've done since, because I usually have a group of friends, we'll put one together. It's usually just like indie venues or house shows. But I met a lot of good friends there, and we have had like so many good performances. It just seems like a really cool place for comedy. Um, and I've just really enjoyed it. One of my good friends, Luke Flip, who I do a lot of live shows with when he was still doing comedy, he's just a cook now, but a really good cook. And I do a podcast with him too, Podzuki. So he's still doing comedy stuff. But his brother owns a place out there as a chef too, because they're like a whole cook family, which is really cool, called New Wave Burritos, and it's like the best burritos I've ever had. So every time I go there, we'll stop by there and usually get a lot of free food, and that really rules. So
Indeed, most definitely. I love Louisville too, and like I went there for Gonzo, and then I got to go to the Kaiju, and they had
oh
they
yeah,
had a
Kaiju
show.
rules.
Yeah, it's a cool place for sure. Met some really cool Louisville comics there, and they whenever they come down to Florida, I say I'm so glad we get to reunite just because comedy connected us that way. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's
indeed,
the thing I think I really enjoy about comedy the most is I would say I've had some success, which is really cool, but I definitely do it more as a hobby. But like, it's still an art and something I really respect as a craft. So I've made a lot of really good friends and had a lot of cool shows and connections I made, but it's all just been kind of like butter on the bread, if that makes sense. Because I just want to give a fun performance and have people laugh and then meet cool people and like make friends as I go. I'm very kind of simple with my projection of what I'm doing with comedy.
indeed, most definitely. And so for this next segment what I'm gonna I was planning on asking you these questions while I was going on tour, like a man on the street, guerrilla style with my camera, but
Yeah.
I couldn't because of COVID. But so we're gonna jump into that. So we talked earlier about your what inspired you to perform stand up. So we're gonna go back into that one. That was the first question. So what inspired you to perform stand up comedy, Brandon?
So that is due to my partner Barb. I think it's a really funny thing. I'm one thing I want to make sure that's clear for anybody watching this and during this interview. I'm a very stupid person. It should always keep me humble, but like I've been a comedy nerd since I can remember. Like growing up as a kid, I'd always watch Comedy Central. I loved watching like stand-up specials on there, anything like comedy oriented. Like Simpsons was my favorite show since I was 8. And then I would listen to comedy albums, and I was always like, "Oh, comedy seems like it'd be so fun to do," but it's something I could never really do. And then one day, like 2013, I think was when it first happened. She's like, "Have you ever thought about doing an open mic in Chicago?" I'm like, "Oh no, open mics are for like professional comedians. You don't just go and do an open mic." And she had to explain to me like literally what an open mic is and how you can just go do comedy there as anyone. I was like, "Oh shit, I should do that." And then I basically went performed for the first time at a place called Shambles in Chicago that's no longer around. I was like, "Oh, this is really fun. I'm just going to keep doing it." And that's basically been why I've been doing comedy all the way till 2020 now.
Awesome. And what inspired you to perform? What was it feeling like when you first performed stand up?
I mean, like most comedians, it was awful. I like I had one good joke that got some good laughs, which was great. And the rest were just kind of like bad headline takes, like current events everyone had heard too much about, and then being like, "Oh, my partner, right?" And stuff like that, which I've definitely shifted away very quickly, which is great. But I think I had the one big laugh from the one decent joke I had was like enough to keep me in it and be like, "Oh, I really enjoy this, and it's a craft I've always respected, so I might as well work at it." I think it's very similar to like art, where as a kid I'd write jokes in like my notebooks all the time and do writing like that, and would just keep doing it. I'm like, well, if I'm doing this, I might as well like perform and do comedy. And I think that I was at least funny enough to keep it going and people to enjoy it that I'm like, okay, I'll just keep at it.
Indeed, most definitely. And you mentioned that you grew up watching comedy specials and whatnot. And what are your favorite comedy specials and comedy record albums?
That's always a fun question. I feel like I always default to Maria Bamford. I think just in general, she has such like a good comedic voice and so unique that you really can't find another Maria Bamford. All of her specials I think have been great. Favorite either might be like the special, which is the one where she recorded it with just her family as the audience, which I think is still hilarious. Or her second album, which I got to remember the name of. I'm looking it up. Thank God we get to do this where we have a computer. Because I want to make sure I get the right one. Yeah, it's the Unwanted Thoughts Syndrome from 2009. I think that's the one I go back to pretty often and still laugh at. I would say probably tied with Maria Bamford, my second favorite comedian would be Brent Weinbach. He might not be as like famous, but I think he's just so extremely weird and unique with the comedy he does that you don't see another comedian like Brent Weinbach. Like the first time I saw him live was in like LA, probably like 2014. and like it was like a just transcendental like performance of like you just don't see anything like that. The whole audience was laughing, and it was just completely insane. So yeah, he's always been a favorite since then, and he's had quite a few good albums that he's like self-recorded or released too.
Awesome. I'll definitely have to look into his special too, because I love the weird and out of the box kind of
Oh,
comedy.
if you like weird, Brent Weinbach's going to be your guy for sure.
Awesome, fantastic. And a lot Maria's, I've seen her on TV a couple times, like Netflix and all that stuff, and on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And I want to know what your favorite sitcom sketches and comedy films are.
Oh, this could go for a while too, man. I mean, I love consuming media. If we're even just talking Mary Bamford, she had that excellent show on Netflix, Lady Dynamite, which I highly recommend. Both she gets to write it, most of it, great material. She's a pretty great actor herself too, but it's like a great show that shows the spectrum of what it's like to have bipolar disorder and deal with. I think any show that can both be funny but also like teach people about like dealing with mental illness, it's fantastic. I think for a favorite sitcom right now or show, hands down, What We Do in the Shadows, just completely amazing. First season, really funny. Second season somehow got even more funny and just kept upping the ante of like how well everything was written and well done. Plus, it has Matt Berry in it, who's one of my favorite comedic actors, I think, possibly on screen at any time. Just an amazing English dude who's he's so funny in any scene you put him in. And then I'd say for like animated shows, home movies is one I go back to pretty often. That's the one that Brendan Small did with a few other people like John Benjamin, who's just like super famous now for Bob's Burgers, and then also why am I forgetting another show? The one that's on FX, but you know it's pretty good too.
Indeed, most definitely. And let's see, favorite sketch shows and comedy films.
I mean, I'm very old school. Mr. Show is still one of my favorites. It's really hard to beat like the Taint sketch that I think is still very funny. A lot of it's aged pretty well too because they go into like just a lot of sketches making fun of our political madness in this nation. So that's been getting a lot of good replays during 2020 of watching old sketches they did back in 1999, almost predicting the place we are right now. And then I don't know, recent sketches. I think You Should Leave. That would be another one that's just fantastic. Tim Robinson's just got such a unique voice, and every sketch they did for that first season they had just so funny. Like it's so well written as a comedian. When you watch it, you get upset. Like how is he so constantly this good? Like it's not fair to anybody who's working in the craft who wants to have that scope.
Indeed, in comedy films.
Comedy films. I mean, once again, I like to go back to a lot of those classics. I feel like I had this formative era of like the early 2000s when I was much younger and still in high school of like really attaching to certain movies. So Wet Hot American Summer comes to mind right away. It's just so delightfully stupid. I don't think I've ever seen such a stupid, funny movie before, and I don't know if anybody can pull it off again like that. So it's the one I go to pretty often.
Sweet. You mentioned Brendan Small, and it made me think back of the times I lived in the years that I lived in LA, and I got to interview him backstage at the Roxy. And so after the interview that we're doing now, I'll send you the interview that I did with Brendan Small. So.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. I hope he's a nice guy. I'd be so sad if I found out he's like some type of weird jerk or something.
Oh, he was super cool. He was a super cool guy, most definitely. And if you can go on tour with a comic locally and internationally known, which comics would you like to go on tour with?
Oh man, that's a good question. My first impulse is to pick somebody I absolutely hate just to see how it would work. Like, oh, I'll go with Jeff Dunham and see what happens. But no, I think if I could go with anyone, I feel it. So this is such a hard question because I feel like I'd be a burden to anyone I choose. Of like, I have confidence in myself. And I think I'm pretty funny on stage, but like when you're dealing with somebody who's like a stone cold professional, it's like, oh man, I don't want to completely get in your jam here with things I'm doing. I think any comedian right now, Julio Torres is one I really like a lot. I think it'd be really cool to do a tour with him just because of how great Less of Spookies was. And his special that he put out in 2019 is probably one of my favorite specials of the decade. Just once again, very similar like Brent Weinbach, where it's just such a unique creative voice, but still super funny. I think that's what I really like in a comedian is when like they can be super creative, but like still tell jokes. Like, because you get so many where it's like, okay, great jokes, but boring material that we've all heard, or super creative, but didn't make me laugh at all. He's one of those people, and like Brent Weinbach, where I feel like, and Maria Bamford, where they get that perfect level of both just super creative and super funny.
Indeed. And locally, a local comic?
I mean, local comics, it's once again, That's a hard choice because I feel like whenever I do tours, it's always hard to pick like my comedy buddies that I want to go with. But the one I work with the most, I feel like, and is a really good friend for like comedy projects I've been doing, it'd either be Hobart Thompson or I want to say, I feel if any of my friends listen to this, I'm gonna feel really bad now. It's like, hey, listen, if I didn't pick you, it's because I was put on the spot. So I'd say either Hobart Thompson, Aaron Klopfer, or Liz Getty. So
Awesome. I interviewed Aaron a while back, and so his interview's on the episode, and he's a pretty cool cat. I dig him.
yeah, that motherfucker better mention to me, or I'm gonna be so upset I picked him right now.
Indeed. And if you can get roasted by 5 comedians, top 5 dead or alive, which ones would you like to get roasted by?
Oh, dead or alive? Now that's fun. I mean, that. Once again, I'm gonna go with. I feel like Maria Bamford, just because I'd want to have the honor of being torn apart. Eugene Merman, I feel like, would do something really unique and crazy with that. If we can pick anyone, Chris Rock, just because I want to know how bad he'd be able to make fun of me once he knows my whole thing and all of that. Because he's another one that I grew up really loving. And then I think Megan Galley, just because she's really good at that, especially from any like comedy set or special I've seen that she's on or any type of interview. And last choice would probably be like Ashley Ray. She's a comedy bud that moved off to LA, but super funny, really great on Twitter, great comedian, but she's also really super visceral. Like when she tears somebody apart, she tears them apart. So, if I'm going to get roasted, you got to go all the way in.
Indeed, most definitely. And let's see here. What do you see your comedy career in the next 5 years?
I don't know. Like it's one thing. I feel like there's a lot of comedians who are really dedicated to the craft and they know where they're going, or they like to have a plan, even if it's more of a hobby. But with comedy, I've always just seen where it takes me, and I really like the path. So I feel like it's just being kind of a wanderer with it and see what happens. Because I mean, I've gotten some pretty cool credits and done some pretty cool shows just because I want to enjoy it and do what feels good for me. So I think that's like a good path to stay on. It's a pleasant surprise each time when cool things happen, and I kind of like having that feeling.
Indeed, most definitely. And which other forms of comedy would I venture off into, like improv, sketch, comedy writing, acting, directing, etc.?
I'd say sketch and writing, acting, just because it's fun for the few projects I've been involved with. I don't know if I'd be good at it, but it just seems like it's a fun thing to do. But writing and sketch is one thing I've definitely been thinking about a lot more during the pandemic when we can't go out and perform, especially because Chicago's a lot more like strict on rules, which is good. But like, there's no comedy shows happening for the most part right now because we just went back into like stage 3 lockdown, whatever that means. It's very apparent that like I think stand-up's kind of a narrow focus of comedy. I love stand-up, but like you can do so much more with it. So I think like writing and sketch is a nice thing. But also like you, I've been doing a lot of podcasting for the last few years and gotten really focused on it during the pandemic. I think continuing doing like a lot of cool like podcasting and streaming stuff too. So, that's kind of where I'm looking at right now.
Indeed, most definitely. And what is your favorite joke a comic has ever written?
A favorite joke that a comic has ever written? Oh, man. I think of George Carlin's bit about hell is full of dads a lot, which is just a really simple premise of like everyone loves their dad, but like everyone's dad was just a piece of shit. Like, if you go to hell, it's just full of 20 million dads. Because it's such a weird premise and it's a really good one I think about a lot. For local like comedians in Chicago, there's a guy named Adam Cole. And when I first started going to Pressure, which is an open mic I run and a showcase that I also help run there, he had a joke about like cavemen before religion and like society was invented, how it was probably just like 20 cavemen giving each other like hand jobs and blowing each other because there was no like societal norms on what sexuality was. And like he would just go into this whole bit of making like all these caveman sex sounds, and it's an extremely over the top bit. But every time he told it, I would just be in tears. So I think that would be the one I go for.
Indeed, most definitely. And what experience would you like your audience to take with them after a set is over?
I mean, I once again, I'm very bread and butter with how I think comedy should be. I just want them to laugh and like have had a good time. I think I will get into politics or other ideas every once in a while, more to like lampoon it, not really get people to think too much about it. But if they do, that's a nice takeaway too. But I think if you go to a comedy show as an audience member, you're going there to enjoy yourself and laugh and like maybe even like have some weird stuff presented to you that you would never thought about, but then you find yourself kind of enjoying the premise and thinking about it. So it's kind of like all of that wrapped together, I'd say.
Indeed, most definitely. And so uh and let's see here. What's uh a couple of the last section is the nominees that you'd have as my featured guests on the show. Because I was wondering, like, which folks would you like to have on the show? Because like Larry Fulford had nominated you in the very beginning of the whole thing, back when I was setting up all the nominees and whatnot. So, with that being said, which open micer would you like to have on the future show of this stand up speakeasy?
Yeah, that's I'm glad you were like asking this question to Larry and all that because Larry let me know. So I like asked a few friends before if they'd be down with it. But I mentioned earlier somebody I think it would be fun to tour with, and I like a lot. But Liz Getty, they're fantastic. I do a podcast with them called Desk and Day Jobs, which is like a live play D&D podcast with a bunch of Chicago comedians. So I just nominate everybody I do that show with. So I'd say Liz Getty, but also then Hobart Thompson, who's a really good friend, and then Spencer Blair, who's another great friend. Um, I would say Gwen Hope, but they're not as online, so I'm only leaving them out to save you a little time for scheduling that because it'd be a lot easier for you. But yeah, those three I would nominate for sure. I think they do a really good job. And then I don't know if Aaron mentioned him last time, but Tristan Smith is, I think, one of my favorite comedians in Chicago. And I see him a lot at Mike's and do a lot of shows with him. So I'll also put Tristan Smith on that. So I'll give you four juicy leads there, I'll say.
Awesome, fantastic. And your favorite feature comic?
So just like a comic that wouldn't be headlining, but's featured pretty often.
Yep, in Chicago.
Oh yeah, then I definitely go with Tristan. He's at the point where he should be headlining more, and he does headline pretty often, but he gets featured a lot. He's just such a solid joke writer. He's got a really great view on things. He made a joke about like how Michael Jordan of like molesting could get famous. I'm explaining the joke really bad, but basically it is a joke about like child molestation that's done so well that it doesn't bother you. That's the subject, and it's not like trying to be edgy when he tells it. So he's like really dedicated to the craft, especially like pushing premises that are really hard to make work and then making them work, which is always impressive.
Indeed. And your favorite headliner?
Favorite headliner in Chicago? They technically moved up to Green Bay, but they're still one of my favorites. But Kristen Leidy, I think she's one of my favorites that were in the Chicago scene for a while, and they tour pretty often. They come through Chicago pretty often, so I'd still count them. You know.
Indeed. And Wisconsin still counts because it's along the time zone. So
yeah, it's just Chicago sad anyway. So
indeed, I'll definitely reach out to her, the folks in Green Bay for sure. And your favorite host?
My favorite host? Ooh, that's a good question. There's a lot of good mics that I think have done a great job with that. A more recent one that I started going to right before the pandemic, but I've always been a fan of theirs, Adrienne Stout. She's a really great host of a mic that was going at Spinners. They're going to have to find a new mic because when the Black Lives Matter protests happened, the person who ran Spinners put on like one of the most racist rants I've ever seen on their website about like, oh, black people are doing this because they want the attention. So Adrienne Stout afterwards like, we're not doing this anymore. We got to find a new mic to put this somewhere else. So Godspeed, praying they find a good home for their mic. But she's a fantastic host. I really like everything that they've done. So and anytime they've hosted any show I've seen in Chicago or open mic, just fantastic work for getting the crowd and the comics involved.
Most definitely. And your favorite showrunner or show producer?
Ooh, that's another one. Like, who puts together really good shows in Chicago? A few come to mind for that. James Webb is a pretty stellar dude for putting that together. He runs a whole podcasting network in Chicago, but he used to run a show called Stand Up. They'd always book really great comedians, and he's really dedicated just to show running and producing. So I'd say James Webb's definitely one that comes to mind right away for like top one in Chicago.
Awesome, fantastic. And I'll have to have you help me out with the spelling of all their names because sometimes I reach out to the wrong person and I'm like, oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The wrong person. So that'd be awesome. Well, I'll remind you after the show too. I'm also and so we reached the conclusion of the show. And so I wanted to remind everyone watching at home to follow Brandon on Instagram and Twitter, visit his website, scrolling on the bottom, donate to him if you can on his PayPal, and donate to American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU.org, and Chicago Community Bond Fund, which is chicagobond.org/donate on behalf of Brandon. And with that being said, Brandon, are there any final words you'd like to give to the audience at home?
I'd say it's January now. Hopefully, like there's a good cure on the way or a vaccine for COVID-19. But if not, keep taking it seriously. Keep wearing a mask, please. Be safe. It ain't getting any better. And I have a feeling if it's like with how things have been going, January is not going to be looking too much hotter than November right now. So be kind to people, respect boundaries, and try to be empathetic. I think everyone needs it right now more than ever.
Indeed, I've been taking my vitamins and saying my prayers like Hulk Hogan told me
Yeah,
to do.
vitamin
So
D. They say it's supposed to be pretty good for helping against it. So
absolutely, indeed. And so thank you so much, Brandon, for being on the show today. And I can't wait to send you the link with the Brandon's small interview, and you'll
yeah,
help
I'm
me.
gonna watch that. That sounds awesome.
Indeed, and I'll definitely have to get those names from you so that we can reach out to the right people and all that good stuff and have them as my guests. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day, Brandon. And it means a lot to me. And we'll see you next time on Stand Up Speakeasy.
Yeah,
Have a
I
good
appreciate
evening,
you for
everyone.
having me here too. It was really nice.
You're very welcome, bud. Anytime. I'll see you soon, dude.
All right.
Hopefully, yeah, awesome.